Elizabeth doesn't ever go very far from London. This is Kenilworth. So I want to talk about the 1575 visit she took to Kenilworth. Now, it's an interesting day to do this. I don't have any more prizes. Does anybody know who owned Kenilworth, who she's going to visit here? Oh, a lot of you know. Who was it? Dudley. Yes, Dudley. Now, yesterday, of course, was the anniversary of the death of Amy Robsart. So that may be on your mind, okay? Dudley's first wife. But yes, this was long after that. This is in 1575. And he invites her to stay with him on a progress. He rebuilds and adds wings to his home to accommodate her because he is going all out. 1575. She's been on the throne since 1558. She's not old because, of course, she was never old. But it's coming to the time that if she's going to marry and have children, she needs to get on it, okay? And Dudley feels the same way. If you look at Robert Dudley, he started with a large family and a lot of brothers. And he ends up the last one in his family dynasty. And so by 1575, he knows he either needs to marry the queen or he needs to marry somebody else. So this sort of seems to be his last big hurrah, but he's giving maybe a couple of messages here. Marry me or, not or else, because you don't say or else to Elizabeth, but she's very insistent on ruling on her own, and this is his big attempt to see if he can overcome this resistance, okay? So there are pageants. She is met by the Lady of the Lake, so he is connecting himself with the legend of King Arthur, and of course the Tudors are connected to King Arthur, and so he is presenting himself as this great knight. Hopefully nothing falls down. We'll just keep talking. It's being renovated for a progress. And when he receives her, and I love this, of course, not from the time image though, but she rides up on her white horse and he comes to greet her, and there are all these people in disguise. And he's also hired one of the most well-known poets and playwrights or crafters of pageants of the time to create and script this whole thing. It is carefully monitored beginning to end. So on a progress, the royal is showing off, and on this progress, Dudley is really competing with Elizabeth, who's showing off more magnificence and might. That might have been a mistake, as it turns out. All right. So you can see how she's greeted. He makes this grand gesture. This house can be yours for this period of time. And her response is, I thought it was mine already. Because, of course, she had given it to him. Now, if he'd been smart, he would have known that that first exchange meant, don't mess with me. But it goes on. There are a lot of things he does to reinforce his special status. He's, after all, the host. This helps him be elevated in terms, yes, he's on the council, but he's also the host, so he has more access. She's in his home. He has more access. This is going on. A lot of these pageants are glorifying marriage, and somehow always end up recommending him as the ideal husband. The other thing he does, and this is really quite startling when you think about it, he has a huge art collection, but he commissions 2 pairs of portraits of him and Elizabeth as a paired portrait, right? They're individual portraits, but they're dressed in similar ways. They are looking very similar. They are hung next to each other in his home where all the court is, and any foreign visitors who happen to be traveling through will see. That is something that's only done with married couples. So he is making a huge gesture by commissioning these portraits and hanging them in this way in his home among this other portrait collection. So he's really showing her, this could be you. Okay. The other thing he does, though, interestingly, these 2 portraits don't exist, but the drawings do. And you see he's showing himself in armor. So his fallback plan, if she's not so overcome that she agrees to marry him, his fallback plan is, okay, then I will fight for you and the Protestant cause. So one of the portraits is him as the Protestant champion, because that's the other sort of legacy that's available. Okay. And he is much more at court, demonstrating a commitment and an armed commitment to Protestantism. Elizabeth is not really ready to send troops to support Protestants in other countries. And that's what Dudley is angling for. He wants to go to the Low Countries and fight for the Protestants. He wants to go to the continent and fight for the Protestants. And Elizabeth thinks that's not a good idea, not just for him. She's just not really interested. She wants to protect her religion in her country, but she knows, as she really is more realistic about how tenuous her own reign is, and she sends troops out to irritate all of the Catholic powers of Europe, who are already concerned because Mary, Queen of Scots, is right there in the country. Mary, Queen of Scots shows up 10 years after Elizabeth takes the throne. She's right there for all the Catholics to say, you know, would really like to have be queen? This woman who's right there. And so immediately after Mary, Queen of Scots, rebellions of the Catholics start, and supported by the Catholics on the continent. And the last thing Elizabeth wants to do is make them angrier at her. So she does not want to send Dudley or anybody else, but he's kind of going for both. He's kind of wanting her either marry him or let him be a war hero kind of thing. And ultimately, Elizabeth is not so much interested in either. Now, I do want to say, and this is considered one of the Civ portraits. This was painted around the time of this magnificent progress, probably a little bit earlier, commissioned by Christopher Hatton, who didn't want her to marry Dudley and didn't want her to marry Anjou of France, her frog, and thought she should just probably at this point stay single. The idea of the Civ, there's some other portraits. There's a legend that the Vestal Virgins are so pure that they can walk with water in a sieve, and their purity will make it so not even a drop falls through the sieve, right? Pure, no drops of water. And so that's why Elizabeth is painted with a sieve. It's really leaning into that virgin queen. So this is sort of competing with Dudley, hanging the two portraits as if she's going to marry him, right? But in the midst of all of this, I just want to pause for a moment. This magnificent progress to Kenilworth may have even another sort of lasting image that it creates. I want to read you just a little bit. There is in the pageant, he has a water pageant, and there is a mermaid, and there's a mechanical dolphin, and the mermaid swims and gets on the dolphin's back, and they float along in this water pageant. I mean, it's just extraordinary, these descriptions of this. But I want to read you just a description. Since once I sat upon a promontory and heard a mermaid on a dolphin's back, uttering such dulcet and harmonious breath that the rude sea grew civil at her song, and certain stars shot madly from their spheres to hear the sea maid's music. Now that sounds an awful lot like the scene at Kenilworth. That is, of course, from Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. All right. There is a chance, it is likely John Shakespeare, who was mayor at the time that this happened, would have traveled a few miles from Stratford to Kenilworth. And maybe he took his son, who was so interested in plays, or maybe William Shakespeare just read one of the multiple descriptions. But we do see some things in Midsummer that sound an awful lot like the pageant. And at the end of the pageant, at the end of this Kenilworth progress, Elizabeth I leaves early. She's been there 19 days. It's the longest she's ever stayed anywhere on a progress. 19 days. He gets the prize for that, but he wanted her to stay longer. And as she's leaving, and he has Gaston, this poet he's hired, write one final plea to her to stay. And he's like literally chasing her off, and he's crying out, "Live here, dear queen, live here." And she doesn't. She rides off and goes to her next home, and then goes back to London. But in a really interesting scene in Midsummer, it talks about, and the imperial votress passed on in maiden meditation, fancy free. And I thought, yeah, she kind of did. She rode on out, fancy free, in her maiden state. Anyway, it really is sort of an interesting way that this Kenilworth Progress gives us a glimpse of Dudley and his real attempt, of her and her determination. It's thought that she, they tell her what these pageants are going to be about, and she refused to see a couple of them. She didn't want them performed because they either ended in a marriage, or in one case, they ended in a maiden in distress, having to be rescued by the brave knight. She didn't want to be a maiden in distress, and she didn't want that associated with her. She didn't need any rescuing. Thank you so very much. May have been one of the reasons she wrote off fancy free. But it really does give us a glimpse of the idea of these progresses as interaction between the queen and her people. This huge gathering, thousands of people would come to some of these pageants.